Welcome to another episode of Theological Sidebars. It's good to have you with me. Here we are. So, just thought I'd throw out something just maybe a little bit different, a little bit off topic from normal. We've just had Easter Sunday, and last week we also had the beginning of Passover. Of course, Passover is more of like a week long because it has Passover, and then right after that is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which runs for 7 days. So let's kind of talk about what I thought would be interesting just to look at, just a little devotional thought, if you will. First off, let me just say this. I think that every Christian should celebrate Passover, okay? I think it's important for us to do this, not because it's mandated, though if you, look, I mean, let's just do it. Look at the text right here. Keep this command permanently as a statute for you and your descendants. Okay. So for Israel, Old Covenant was something they were supposed to always do, right? Because it was supposed to teach a story. What story was that they're supposed to teach them? Well, it's to tell them about everything that happened in the old days when it talked about the plagues that hit Egypt and all of that, right? But there's more to it. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's just start like this, okay? Passover. Look at the passage. This one I want to focus on right there. No, what on earth? There you go. If you're looking, I always have problems mirroring screens. I want to say this, but this is the wrong way to point if I'm looking at my screen. If you're listening, this is irrelevant and a waste of your time. All right, listen to this passage here. Keep this command permanently as a statute for you and your descendants. Now, this is from Exodus 12, beginning in 24. Now, when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he promised, you are to observe the ceremony. When your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord. For he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians, and he spared our homes. So the people knelt low and worshiped. And the Israelites went out and did this just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So, notice that this story of Passover is for Israel to always be reminded over and over and over of what God did to Egypt. Now, tied into this idea, right, is you have that event of Passover, but you also have just the story in general, right, of why was he hitting Egypt hard? Why did the people need to be passed over? Well, it was a judgment he was bringing on the land, but it was all tied about pulling them out finally to Passover night. Is the beginning of the new story for they've been pulled finally out of slavery the next morning because Pharaoh was not immune from the judgment. Now, so this is what I think is interesting, right? Because Passover is something that is meant to be not only in the life of Israel. Every year are they supposed to be reminded of this. They're supposed to be thinking about this story, talking about this story. I think there's some heavy themes there that are important for the Christian to remind themselves of, right? Like the idea that blood of a lamb would need to be spilled, put over the front of the house, and that is the marker of showing that they had been passed over. That they would not have that judgment take place in their house. They would be spared from when the Lord would strike. So that's important, right? Because Egypt got it, Israel got it. If there were Israelites that decided they weren't going to do it, they were going to get it too, okay? That's the first part. But this is the part that I think the reason that got me thinking about this just is verse 26, I mean. When your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Now, this is the part that I think is important for us to keep in mind. This is meant to be one of those things that we know that kids would ask, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And I think every holiday, every Christian does, we should have it from that element of a teaching element. Why do we do this? Why do we do that with Easter? Do we do that? You've heard me probably say this over and over. I think we should seize the holidays, right, to be a time to teach our kids. But this is something I think is important for us. Not only I think it's important for families to teach Passover, because I think these are great themes. I think it's an illustration of the gospel, and our kids maybe get it better, right, when you think about that. But I also think this is the devotional piece, right? Think about this. of when your children ask you, what does this mean to you? So the question I really need to ask you is, are you prepared for if your children were to ask you questions about your faith? Or are you prepared to really explain beyond the Easter piece, right? Why do we do this? Well, Jesus died on the cross, right? And rose again for the, okay, can you do that? Okay, that's great. But I just want to say beyond that, like this was supposed to be an open invitation for the kids to begin to say, what is this? And notice what he can tell the story. Can you tell the story? Can you tell the story of the gospel? Can you tell the story from the gospels of the life of Jesus? Can you tell the story of the scriptures, of how it all ties together? Could you tell the story if your kids were to ask you, what this is all about? Could you start in Genesis, though, and begin to tie it together? Because I think it's actually pretty interesting when you think about telling the story, that we sometimes like try to tell the story as if, the New Testament is all that matters and it's all that begins, right? However, it seems like we should probably start from the beginning, though. We need to probably think about, starting as early as the book of Genesis, right? So, I mean, you even think about this. You can start with Genesis, but think about I would say we start with Genesis 1, begin to talk about God's creation, the fall, all of that. I think it's interesting, right? Like if you were to look at the story, and I think this is a great tool for Christians to think about, right? When Stephen is about to be martyred, and he begins to think about talking to them, what does he do? Well, he starts all the way from Abraham, and he ties the story, right? What does he do? He ties it. So notice he goes with Abraham, then he gets into the patriarchs being in Egypt, he gets to Moses, and then what does he do? He gets on, he keeps moving on, he keeps talking about Israel's rebellion, he keeps just tying the story together, right? And then he gets to showing how this all ties to Jesus, right? How this ties that this has always been the people. This has always been the problem of the people. And so he just does it together. He doesn't just start and just say, let me just start with Jesus, but let me tell you the whole thing. So it's just something I think that we should consider is, am I prepared if my kid asks me, what does this all mean? Do I have enough of my own background in the Bible to be able to share the story? I think too many times we say, don't worry about that. We just want to talk about, and we stay so either elementary, or we just say, I don't know, let's ask somebody who does. But I think that the Passover meal was like incumbent upon every person to be able to say, this is why we do what we do. This is why we eat these things. Let me tell you the story behind it. So think about, do we know more than just the gospel story? The gospel story is essential. Do you know enough about that? You should. But do we know more than that? Are we able, if someone were to ask you, why do we do this, right? Do you know it? So that's my call, I think, is important to say, is do you know it? And I think if you've got kids, that you should be able to kind of recount all of that to them. So, and that's a lot of that's kind of right in line with what we say when we talk about something from 1 Peter chapter 3. But he says, but in your hearts regard Christ as the Lord as holy, ready at any time to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. So are you being able to do this? Can you recount these things? All right, that's all I got for now. I hope this is helpful, and I hope that you be thinking about this a little bit more. We'll talk to you a little bit later. Bye-bye.